Today, we'll check out recent weekend trades and trading methods that you can use for price action and smart money trading. We will do a full analysis of ranges and liquidity and how to use structures for Bitcoin price action trading. We will cover many concepts in this video: how to enter trades, how to avoid bad entries, how to find targets to aim for. We have so much to do. If you're ready, let's start. Welcome our free trading course. Our main focus is price action trading strategies and smart money concepts. If you love scalping and day trading, or maybe swing trading and looking for special trading strategies, check out my free trading course. You can find the links on Google Drive or directly from my website, which is in the description. Okay folks, today we will look at this small 15 and 5-minute range. We traded this range like crazy. I saw many Twitter followers also traded it all weekend using liquidity and fair value gaps concepts. Before we get into the trades, let us remember, how did we identify this range at the very beginning? Now this is the 5 minutes chart, much before we started trading. First of all, can you notice how the price is rejected from certain price levels, up and down? These are the first breadcrumbs of ranges, basically the beginning phase of an order accumulation. Notice how the price is pulled back to range EQ, like table tennis from one player to another. Finally, you can notice the volume profile. It starts to have a mountain shape, which confirms the order accumulation at the center. Remember, ranges are order accumulation phases before a final explosion. 99% of ranges explode to the one side. Now, when I was looking at the range within the 5-minute time frame, I immediately noticed this 3-tap pattern. But what is TT3 really? What is it? It is not a lovely shape based on an ancient mystery. It is a pattern based on liquidity. But how? Very simple. The first two legs of the TT3 pattern confirm a proper liquidity hunt for the reverse direction. Lastly, we are looking for an entry with a proper target. It is as simple as that. Everything I teach, every single pattern, is based on two things: liquidity and imbalance, but nothing else. Now let us check this third leg. Can we find an entry with a good target? We will dive into 1-minute chart and see. Now, as you can see, candlesticks are really ugly and very flat. It is due to the holiday season, the Easter holiday. Because most traders go out with their Lamborghinis and have fun skiing in the Alps. But poor traders like us sit still and keep trading. Now, what do I do first? Our usual drill: finding the targets. Notice these significant giant imbalances above, inside the range premium. But more importantly, check this out: a magnificent equal highs. Just the way I like it. Equals and imbalance combo. I have a target, great, all good. But how do I enter a trade? Where? When? How? Notice this MSB around the third leg of TT3. By the way, this MSB happened way before I entered the trade. I'm just checking the previous price action. Notice this lovely imbalance area. Top of the imbalance, very straight trendline liquidity. You can also use your OTE to pinpoint discount zones. So basically, I have a destination, I have a car. I need fuel, I need gas to reach my destination. This imbalance and a full hunt of trendline liquidity are my fuel. My car has a full tank now. As you can see, the price shoots up to the target. Believe me guys, I have watched this happen thousands of times. It is not a 100% win rate strategy, but very, very powerful. Let's go back to the 5-minute time frame and check the other trades. I noticed this lovely imbalance at premium levels. My idea was very simple: short around from this imbalance. But the price needs to go up first, so basically to short it, I was going to long it first. Notice this tiny liquidity inside the imbalance. I aimed for that first. All good, but any proper entry reaction points. This lovely break and imbalance was my reaction zone. The order block combination made it even better. Plus, the price made a nice inducement here, more fuel for our long trip. Now switch to 1 minute chart. This was a clear break here, confirmed by MSP for me. I noticed this nice imbalance area and micro inducement inside it. So basically, since we were extremely close to the imbalance, I thought why not, a quick hunt can happen. I was around 1 hour profit, then it did not happen. It stopped me out. And this was a full loss. You know what I did after the stop loss? I quit trading and threw the computer to the wall. How come I lost a trade after 10 years experience? How in the world I lost a trade? I immediately opened the EMA 9 and EMA 20 and start trading moving average crossovers. All jokes aside, let's continue. Going back to the 5-minute chart, we are not done with this trade. Let's see what happens afterward. Our imbalance stays as it is, fresh and never filled. But this time, I noticed the clarity of liquidity, a full proper equal highs combined with imbalance. My number one target in the trading world. You can also notice the bottom imbalance, which is in the range discount, and a couple of order blocks. Now all is good, but I do not know where the price will react. I have to watch the price action closely and confirm the structural shift. Okay, let's talk about the market structure breaks. This break is a weak MSP because it does not create the deepest lower low. Now this break is also a weak MSP. It does not also create the deepest lower low. Now this is the one, the best MSP which created the deepest lower low. But how to choose which MSP then? So many market structure breaks and possibilities. After all, a weak MSP is still a shift in structure. We will talk about that in a bit. Now you can see the breaker block right at this point, and a clear imbalance area which touches the breaker block. If you use your micro premium and discount, you'll notice that price in the cheap area as well. Now, there are two types of entries here. Using a tight stop right below the imbalance or much larger cushioned stop loss. I prefer the second one because back in the day I got stopped out a lot with tight stop losses. I still use the tight stop losses from time to time depending on the chart. Now back to the strong and weak MSP. I think the more important thing is how the break is happening. Notice this very powerful and strong price movement here. Now this is actually what I want to see, our little secret. Okay, now the price hunted all my previous targets. Can I take a short from here? Let's see. Remember, it is best not to jump trades without lower time frame action and confirmation. Because no guarantees here, this is a range. The price can fly away from here and no one knows that. Switching to 1 minute chart. Very ugly flat candlesticks and lack of volume because of the Easter holiday. Notice this high. Now this low creates that high. And this low is taken out right here. This is not the best price movement in the world actually. Now by using optimal trade entry, this is a possible trade idea. Again, not the best trade in the world. Let's analyze the price much deeper with all our price action tools. What you see here is actually micro leveled equal highs if you look closely. And it is hunted and very briefly swept with this movement right here. And then the price breaks strongly. Notice the quality of this break. This is a powerful displacement, what we want to see. As price action traders, we want pullbacks after strong breaks. But it is not a rule. Nothing is certain in trading. Nothing I teach you is a rule. Things may happen or may not happen. No one knows the future. So if you enter this kind of trade right after the break, you must caution your stop loss against possible pullbacks. It can pull back, we do not know that. In my opinion, this last trade is not very clear. Remember, clear setups will be like butter, very easy, and fly away without resistance. Okay folks, as always, all these trading methods are suitable for scalping, day trading, or even swing trading. I believe that it will be really helpful in your trading life. I hope you subscribe to the channel and like the video. Thank you, please take care and see you soon.